Hello. So in this video, I'll be showing you how I made this Miku render in Blender. Now, this video is going to be an overview of the steps I took to produce this work. I'll go into what worked, what didn't, and everything in between. Now, this video is going to be one of two parts, since this project is part of a larger project I'm currently working on, and at the moment, I'm just trying to figure out the animation workflow. Part 1 will include the modeling, rigging, posing, and the initial rendering test. And part 2 will include the animation, more rigging, technical solutions, and the final render test. So keep an eye out for that video when it comes out. Now, before we begin, I just need to say this render is based on an artwork from this music video. So if you're familiar with Vocaloid, then check it out. The channel has some nice music on it. And if you're not familiar with Vocaloid, well, check it out anyway. Doesn't hurt to try something new. Okay, so with the intro finally over, let's get into it. So to start off with, the first thing I did was to add a sphere which I scoped into a chibi head. After that, I added some color, line art, and eyes. Now, normally I like to block out the character a little more before adding color and line art, but since this character doesn't really have any detail and is essentially just a silhouette, I figured screw the blocking phase, let's just jump straight into the rendering and try to make it look nice. Now, for the line art, I was using the solidify modifier. I plan to switch over to grease pencil, but since I'm more comfortable with the inverse hull technique, I decided to just use that method until the modeling was done. So after adding some color, I started on the hair. To create the hair cap, I just duplicated the head mesh and scaled it out a bit. And to create the front hair, I subdivided some planes and adjusted the edge data. Now the reason I use planes here is because the concept had very sharp and flat shapes, and I thought that using 2D planes would better replicate that. After that, I added a solidify modifier to the hair just to give it a little bit more volume and to allow the line art to actually work, since the inverse hull technique doesn't really work on flat, non-manifold objects. I then created the hairbands and the pigtails. When creating the pigtails, this time I used a curve with a bevel, since long curvy shapes are sort of hard to do with 2D planes. With the head done, it was time to start on the body. To make the torso, I added a cylinder and then extruded out the neck and the arms. I then added a mirror modifier, extruded into sleeves, adjusted the edge data, and finally scaled some things here and moved some verts there. So with that done, her body was looking pretty good. Don't take that out of context. But I wasn't really a fan of the character T-posing, so I rotated the arms to the much more superior A-pose. After that, I added a collar using more planes, I added the legs using more cylinders, and I added the jumper strings using more curves. With the body mostly done, I went back to the head to make some more adjustments. I added some ears, adjusted the hair cap, and then finally fixed up the symmetry a bit. So with that done, I added some hands. Now originally I thought doing PS1 style hands would be best, since firstly, in the concept, the hands didn't really have that much detail, and secondly, hands are annoying, and I wanted to be lazy with it. But turns out I was too lazy to even do that, so instead I imported some V-Roy hands and used those instead. So with the modeling done, it was time to add the rig. Adding the rig wasn't too difficult, but something I had an issue with was getting the elbows to bend correctly. The bend kept occurring slightly off from where I wanted it to be, and I tried adjusting the skeleton, but I just couldn't get it quite right. I'm assuming this was happening because I put the model into an A pose and not a T pose, so maybe the script was having issues trying to predict the correct pole angle since the arm wasn't perfectly aligned with the Y-axis, but I don't know. The character isn't super realistic, so whatever. Close enough is good enough. Now with that done, it was time to rig the jumper. Now in my other video, I experimented with not doing rigging, but sculpting the clothing into place instead. And while the result looked good, it suffered from the small problem of taking fucking forever. But I didn't want to rig it manually, since when it comes to rigging, I don't really know what I'm doing. It's not something I'm too familiar with. So I went online to try and find a solution, and I came across this video. So this video basically shows a simple method of rigging up a dress. Now I followed the video, and yeah, it worked. So with the jumper rigged, I rigged the hair, switched the line art over the grease pencil, set up the background, and it was finally time to pose. While posing the character, I made sure to take mental notes on what worked and what didn't. And after posing the character, I finished off the background. Now, I wanted the elements in the background to jitter, since celestial bodies sparkle and twinkle, and adjusting the brightness was off the table due to the style. And to achieve this, I just slapped a noise modifier onto the line art. And with that, the scene was done. All that was left to do was to animate the camera. When it came to animating the camera, I wanted an organic feel to it. I didn't want the camera to be still or to have obvious interpolation, since I was going for a messy, sketchy look. To do this, I enabled keyframing, press play, and then manually rotated the camera. It took me a few times to get it right, but overall, I think it looked good. And with that, the render was finally done. So, with the test finally over, it's time to assess the final result, and to ask the obvious question, is the rig animation ready? And I can confidently say, no, not really. To start off with, the jumper. While it was interesting to test out the process from the YouTube video I mentioned before, it didn't quite meet my needs, and I think it would still be easier to animate the jumper using bones. Don't get me wrong, I think the technique definitely has its use cases, and I'm glad I'm aware of it, but it just wasn't suited for this project. The next issue is the hands. So the problem with the hands is that I need to be able to rotate the hands and the sleeves independently, since the jumper isn't glued onto the arm and it needs to be able to flutter around on its own. So I'm going to have to add an extra bone for the hand. Overall, the rig needs some changes, but it's not a big deal. The real challenge comes with the rendering issues. So after generating line art, I noticed there were a lot of bad lines. Lines that shouldn't be there, lines that go too far, lines that don't go far enough, etc. I made attempts to fix this, but going frame by frame, fixing mistake by mistake, it's like, at that point, I might as well just redraw all the lines manually. But fuck that. I don't use 3D so I can slave away at unnecessary labor. No, I don't want that. I want to be able to enjoy what I do without getting RSI and constantly being in pain. 10 years at least. But yeah, that's basically everything. The next video will basically be me addressing these problems. And it will also include me doing animation for the first time in years. So that's exciting. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Till next time.